Among the plethora of genres that we see shows for each season, there is always one genre that makes up a good chunk of the show's airing. While there are certainly some great shows that are part of that genre, a large portion of the ones that tend to flood most seasonal lineups nowadays are slop. Like, let's do an experiment real quick. Close your eyes and picture a show with an incredibly basic protagonist and a gimmick so prevalent that it becomes a substitute for any quality writing.
Oh man, isekai?
Yes, the type of show that most anyone would have thought of is, of course, the isekai. There are certainly some great isekais out there, but it seems like so many of the ones that make up each season's lineup are nothing but the exact kind of mediocrity I described earlier. But among all the other genres, there is one that stands out as what is potentially my favorite, and that of course is romance anime.
I swear I smell better than you think I do.
Whether it's the life-changing emotional masterpiece of a story in Clannad, the hilarity and depth of Kaguya-sama Love is War, or the beautiful philosophy of the Rascal Does Not Dream series, there's just something about a great romance anime that can put it among some of my all-time favorite stories. The way that some shows can use romance to develop characters, touch on themes, or explore dynamics continues to showcase that the genre is capable of far more than many give it credit for. But unfortunately, it seems like those qualities are no longer associated with many of the romance anime we see today. Instead, the same oversaturated tropes that I used to describe a lot of isekai earlier have become synonymous with romance anime. Instead of achieving some of the qualities that I described earlier, many of the shows that make up each season's romance anime lineup instead consist of the basic protagonists and overly prevalent gimmicks that made the isekai genre become the clown of the anime landscape. This is one of my favorite genres I'm talking about, by the way. Of course, the clearest of these tropes is the gimmick, as I'm sure anyone who has kept up with romance anime in the past few years has realized just by looking at the title of a series. So many shows try to make their appeal based off the fact that their anime girl is different.
She's not.
She hides her feelings in Russian, forgot her glasses, is not just a cutie, can't communicate, or was reborn as a vending machine in another world and now wanders the dungeon. Do you see the kind of comparison I'm trying to make? Instead of creating a regular character with nothing that stands out at first glance, many creators opt to give the heroine a gimmick and name the series after it, which instantly tells audiences that this series is different, is what I would say if this tactic wasn't the most overused thing in all of current romance anime. While this is done to try and make a character, and by extension a series, that stands out, I personally find that it only makes shows feel more similar. So many times, these gimmick characters don't have much to them besides the gimmick, which just makes them so uninteresting because their shtick can become stale very early on. So many times that a heroine is given one of these gimmicks, it just seems like that's supposed to be a substitute for any depth or well-written qualities that character should have. As a result, this approach to writing the heroine seems somewhat counterintuitive, since oftentimes, the anime girls that tend to remain popular throughout a generation usually have more to them. Look at characters like Kaguya, Mai, Yuki Noshita, or even non-romance anime characters like Frieren, Rim, or Bocchi the Rock. These characters continue to stay somewhat relevant even when their series isn't airing, and their success has nothing to do with a gimmick, but instead lies in the way they are written. These are characters with enough depth to them to feel as if they could be legitimate people, and even when they do have a certain trope, it's often used in ways that benefit the characters, be it comedically, developmentally, or both. As a result, these tend to be female characters that stay remembered, because instead of the series making it immediately clear what these characters are about, like with the gimmick heroine, their shows decide to let audiences understand these characters over time. While some of the gimmicky anime girls from certain shows stick around in the anime community, most of them fade into obscurity shortly after their show quits airing, which is rather ironic since it seems like the creators tried so hard to make their anime girl stand out. But many times, it feels like that's all some creators try to do for the series' heroine, when in reality, the ones that fans like the most rely on much more than instant identification. This of course isn't to say that all of these kinds of characters and the shows that have them should be dismissed, since there are some times where it's done well. In fact, there's a romance anime that I really enjoy that could arguably fit into this discussion, that being Love Chunibyo and Other Delusions. Love Chunibyo heavily relies on the heroine having a gimmick, which of course is Chunibyo, a phase in which one adopts an absurd personality in an effort to feel unique. But the reason why I like this show so much is because how it puts that gimmick to use. Such a large part of the story revolves around Shinibyo and the way that it tells us about the characters, especially Rika, the show's female protagonist. Her Chunibyo actually feels warranted since it's such an integral part of the story, which shows that a romance revolving around an anime girl with a gimmick can be done well. However, this is one of the few exceptions. The vast majority of romance anime where the main girl has a gimmick, the gimmick doesn't really add or take away much, and is rather just there to try and make the show stand out. Keyword: try. Very rarely does a romance anime actually use the heroine's quirk to help tell an interesting story, and it just feels like a superfluous addition that tries to replace any depth that the female lead should have. While there are still some exceptions, many romances that rely on the main girl having a gimmick struggle to find a proper extent to which said gimmick should be relied on. But of course, there's one more character that we usually see. And notice how I said one more, because I swear, it is just the same character popping up in all of these shows. All of the male protagonists are the most basic, uninteresting, cookie-cutter characters you could possibly conjure up. None of them have any depth or originality whatsoever, which has caused romance anime to adopt isekai's infamous self-insert protagonist. For those who don't know, the concept of the self-insert protagonist relies on the idea that the main character has such basic tropes that it's as if the viewers are to insert themselves into the story through them. In most modern romance animes, the protagonist is given the same shy, introverted personality and hobbies that have become synonymous with the show's target demographic, as if writers are trying to give a character mass appeal. While this idea may sound as if it creates characters that can be easily likable for how easy it is to identify with them, this often ends up giving characters the opposite reputation because of how little personality they have. Not much else is put into these characters beyond the stuff you would expect out of your typical self-insert character, which creates forgettable protagonists instead of ones that audiences can attach to. I find that I often end up attaching to characters with more depth injected into them because of how legitimate they feel. Like, even though these characters aren't real,
What?
they have so many qualities in them that make them feel as if they could be. As a result, I often find that the believability of these characters makes it easier to identify with them than the shallow self-insert characters. Because ultimately, there's more to a person's personality than being shy and liking video games. And while those qualities can make a character sound relatable, it only does so on a superficial level. When people identify with a character, it's often because of the flaws they're trying to overcome, problems they're trying to navigate through, or behaviors that help define their personality. While there are some well-written and relatable characters that do still have the typical introverted personality or nerdy interests, such qualities are only a small part of that character, as these characters still offer plenty of depth. Ironically, the self-insert protagonist often backfires and fails to achieve the relatability they set out to because of how unrealistically bland they feel. The same can be said for the situations the self-insert character often finds himself in. In so many isekai, for example, many viewers loved picturing themselves as the guy who suddenly gets transported to a fantasy world with all sorts of insane powers and respect from practically every person in said fantasy world. Of course, tons of isekais started following this logic and began writing protagonists with the far-fetched and glamorous lives that viewers could only dream of in an effort to create more desirable protagonists. However, this approach often creates a story that feels too similar to other ones, since so many of them follow the same premise of the main character being perceived as the coolest guy ever, even though he's just uninteresting. While romance stories often aren't able to do this in the exact same way that I explained with isekai because they're too busy having a high school setting, the core idea of a bland protagonist suddenly living an idealized life is still present. Out of nowhere, the random introverted guy that doesn't even speak in class gets the attention of the most popular girl in school. Like, seriously, there are so many shows that rely on the idea of nerdy guy and popular girl being the main couple, which, in and of itself, isn't actually a bad idea. Some stories that focus on this are able to stress the individuality of each character, make interactions more dynamic, or allow the characters to grow as a result of their differences, which has proven that when done right, the polar opposite couple can be a great way to tell a romance story. Too bad so many shows do this concept bad and make it seem like the most unoriginal concept any romance anime could possibly have. Much like the gimmick heroine or self-insert protagonist, it seems like couples made up of completely differing characters is another decision that was made out of a desire to give the series mass appeal. Like, so many shows act like this is a huge deal, It's as if they expect us to think this is the most insane and original way you could possibly write a romance anime. But in reality, a lot of the shows that use this idea are among the many other romance animes each season with the exact same premise of characters with opposing personalities. And none of them do anything with that concept either. Like, instead of using it to achieve some of the things I mentioned earlier, the show just acts like the idea itself is what makes the show interesting, when in reality, a series has to build off an idea like that for it to feel warranted. Because in all actuality, a romance anime where the characters are total opposites is nothing crazy, despite how much these studios expect us to think so. But when you develop that idea, and are able to consistently show just how big of a difference there is between the characters, yet how much chemistry they still share, only then does it start to become interesting, and only then does the fact that these characters are together sound surprising. I also find that a lot of modern romance anime feel so similar because they all prioritize being a comfort watch. While there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that, I find it hard to get invested at times since there isn't a lot of tension behind what's happening. The lack of tension can make it difficult to stay engaged and continue watching week after week, since there's no pressure to find out what happens. Now, of course, a place where tension is obviously present in a romance anime is whether or not the couple will end up together. However, I find that there are a lot of shows that struggle to make viewers anticipate the confession. So many of them don't even have the couple going out with each other for multiple seasons, which can be done well in some instances, but oftentimes its prolonged absence just makes things uninteresting. In many of those instances, the tension between the two main characters isn't strong enough to really make viewers wonder whether or not they'll actually end up together. And a lot of these shows just constantly dance around the confession, never letting it happen, because after it does happen, a lot of shows don't really know what to do. One of my favorite things to see in a romance anime is a story that continues beyond the point of the two main characters ending up together, because it either cuts out the often stale will they won't they tension, or introduces more interesting storylines. Unfortunately, there are a lot of romances where if the series does continue after the confession, it feels as if the show has just become aimless, which makes it clear that the series really doesn't know how to continue after that point. And since so many shows don't know how to continue past the confession, a lot of them don't, or just drag out the tension when it's too high or too low, to the point that any and all interest you could have towards the potential confession starts fading as the chemistry between the two characters becomes so stale. As a result of this approach to writing romance, the content is a lot more episodic and slice-of-life-esque, relying on simplistic character interactions instead of tension. While there inherently isn't anything bad about a more laid-back, slice-of-life type romance, in fact there are times where I really enjoy it, but a lot of shows simply just don't have the characters for it. For a series to make this kind of laid-back story work, its characters have to be fleshed out enough to make mundane circumstances interesting. When writing a comedy series, the most important part is the characters. Once a show's cast is established enough, the series is able to rely on the way the characters interact with each other or react to certain situations to make things entertaining. Instead of writing jokes, writing well-established characters and putting them in certain situations that let them naturally act in a comedic and in-character way is often the strategy many comedy series rely on, whether it's anime or not. Even if a show isn't meant to be laugh-out-loud funny, it can still be incredibly entertaining because of the way it uses this approach to storytelling. Now think back to the shallow and uninteresting characters I brought up earlier that plague modern romance anime. Do you think those characters are fleshed out enough to make mundane interactions interesting?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't see why not. Yeah.
Because all these characters rely on are gimmicks and viewers being able to easily insert themselves into their place, there isn't enough to these characters for them to be able to make mundane interactions entertaining. The way that these characters are written is not only incredibly overdone and superficial, but is oftentimes to the story's deficit. Since so much of these kinds of shows depend on the quality of the character writing, the shallowness of the gimmick heroine and self-insert protagonist causes the show to become uninteresting. So ultimately, the combination of these shows' lesser qualities only make their shortcomings more apparent. The way that everything blends together creates a show that, while not always straight up bad, really isn't all that good either. But despite their lesser qualities, I wouldn't say that all of these shows are genuinely bad. There isn't enough to really say that they're good, but at the same time, there also isn't enough for them to be legitimately bad either. The majority of these shows are just really mediocre and forgettable, which makes me feel like the romance anime worth checking out nowadays are in the minority. There are so many coming out each season, with most of them relying on little else than the same overdone tropes I've been discussing this whole time. And because there's so much romance anime coming out that all repeat the same tropes, the genre has become noticeably oversaturated, to the point that when I'm deciding what to watch each season, I'm often hesitant to start a new romance. But despite all that, I still love going back and watching older shows or being pleasantly surprised by newer ones. So even with all the slop there is nowadays, the genre still remains one of my favorites.
Do I smell better than you think?